What if everything you thought you knew about old Hollywood marriages was a carefully scripted illusion? Welcome to the real Golden Age drama, where the biggest cover-ups weren't in the tabloids, but in the wedding chapels. Why did so many of your favorite stars tie the knot with people they barely loved or barely even liked? Grab your popcorn and keep your jaw on standby, because we're revealing the 20 most shocking fake marriages of Hollywood's hidden LGBTQ legends. Rock Hudson and Phyllis Gates. Forget Hollywood romance. This was survival, wrapped in a white tuxedo. Rock Hudson, the 1950s ultimate dreamboat, was the man every woman wanted and every man admired. But behind that smoldering gaze and A-list charm was a secret that could end his career in a heartbeat. Rumors about Hudson's sexuality were Hollywood's worst-kept secret, and by the mid-1950s, those whispers threatened to explode onto every newsstand in America. Enter Phyllis Gates, Hudson's agent's secretary, who suddenly became Mrs. Rock Hudson in a wedding that felt less like a love story and more like a crisis management maneuver. The timing was suspiciously perfect. Just as tabloids threatened to out Hudson, the studio pulled the trigger on a shotgun wedding. Gates herself later admitted she was kept in the dark, while others claimed she knew exactly what she signed up for. The marriage lasted a grand total of 3 years and did nothing to stop the press or the persistent rumors. In fact, it poured gasoline on the fire, fueling an entire industry of gossip and speculation. Rock Hudson went on to become one of the first big celebrities to openly suffer from AIDS, and his legacy as an LGBTQ pioneer is tangled up with this infamous Hollywood charade. The marriage may have ended in divorce, but its impact on the culture of secrecy and scandal in Hollywood lasted for decades. Rudolph Valentino and Jean Acker, Natasha Ramboa. You can't write the history of Hollywood deception without Rudolph Valentino, a man so handsome, even the rumors were dashing. Valentino, the original Latin lover of the silent screen, found himself the subject of breathless tabloid rumors about his sexuality, almost from day one. So what did his studio do? They engineered not one, but 2 sham marriages for the heartthrob. First up, Jean Acker, a starlet with her own secrets. The ink on their marriage license was barely dry before Acker locked Valentino out of their hotel room on their wedding night. Legend has it, he slept in the hallway. That union was dead on arrival, and everyone in Hollywood knew it. The second act was Natasha Ramboa, a costume designer rumored to be in a lesbian relationship herself. This marriage, too, was less about love and more about mutually assured discretion. Valentino and Rambova's relationship was so chilly, even their friends called it Hollywood's coldest marriage. But it did what it needed to do. It distracted the press, at least temporarily, from Valentino's alleged bisexuality and Rambova's own tabloid headaches. Both marriages collapsed under their own weight, but they set the gold standard for Hollywood's favorite PR move, the lavender marriage. When people call old Hollywood glamorous, just remember, sometimes all that glitter was just a cover for something a lot more complicated. Judy Garland and Vincente Minnelli. When it comes to iconic Hollywood pairings, few are as fascinating or as engineered as Judy Garland and Vincente Minnelli. Garland was the ultimate studio darling, her every move scrutinized by executives who saw her as a cash cow and little else. Enter Vincente Minnelli, a director as flamboyant as his musicals, and an open secret in Hollywood's queer underground. Their marriage in 1945 had all the trappings of a fairy tale, except everyone in town knew it was as staged as a Broadway set. Garland, ever the pragmatist, understood exactly what was going on. She was protecting Minnelli from Hollywood's notorious morality clauses and maybe buying herself a little emotional safety in the process. Together, they produced a daughter, Liza Minnelli, who'd go on to become a legend in her own right. But behind the scenes, Garland battled addiction, body shaming, and relentless pressure, while Minnelli lived a double life. Their union became the stuff of industry legend, a marriage where both parties knew the script and read their lines perfectly until the curtain finally fell. In the end, their partnership didn't just shield Minnelli, it exposed the industry's toxic obsession with appearances, leaving future generations to ask, was anything in Hollywood ever real? Danny Kaye and Sylvia fine? Comedy may have been Danny Kaye's bread and butter, but his real-life marriage was a tragicomic masterpiece of its own. Kaye was the multi-talented, impossibly quick-witted performer who seemed to live for the spotlight, but his love life was more of a question mark than a punchline. While Kaye's stage persona was flamboyant and often effeminate, a rarity for leading men of his era, rumors of his sexuality swirled throughout his career. Enter Sylvia Fine, a brilliant pianist and lyricist, who became both his creative partner and his wife in 1940. On the surface, their union looked picture-perfect, lasting all the way until Kay's death in 1987. But Hollywood insiders whispered that theirs was a lavender marriage, a partnership born out of necessity, not romance. Some claimed Kay was bisexual, others that he was simply a product of an era where being anything other than straight could end your career overnight. Either way, their marriage provided the stability Kay needed to navigate a world that demanded conformity, even as he thrived by breaking the rules on stage and screen. It's the ultimate Hollywood paradox. A man known for his comedic honesty, forced to hide his truest self just to keep working. Carrie Grant and multiple wives. Now let's talk about Carrie Grant, the matinee idol so smooth, even his marriages seemed scripted. Grant was married 5 times, each union as glossy and photogenic as a Technicolor movie poster. But behind the string of beautiful wives, Virginia Cherrill, Barbara Hutton, Betsy Drake, Diane Cannon, and Barbara Harris, was a persistent rumor mill working overtime. Hollywood's worst-kept secret? Grant's close, lifelong relationship with fellow actor Randolph Scott, with whom he shared a home for years. Studio execs, panicked by the endless whispers about Grant's private life, allegedly pushed him into marriage after marriage to shore up his image as the ultimate ladies' man. Friends and biographers alike have suggested that Grant's wives were chosen more for their PR value than for any grand passion. And while Grant himself never confirmed or denied anything, the optics were impossible to ignore. The result? One of Hollywood's most dazzling and most artificial personal lives, proof that even the kings and queens of the silver screen sometimes needed a little help from the costume department. In a town built on illusion, Carrie Grant was the master illusionist. Barbara Stanwyck and Robert Taylor. When it comes to Hollywood power couples, few looked better on a movie poster than Barbara Stanwyck and Robert Taylor. But if you peeked behind the velvet curtain, their storybook marriage starts to look more like a well-rehearsed cover-up. Stanwyck, the queen of tough girl roles, was fiercely private off-camera, and her close relationships with women sparked endless gossip. Meanwhile, Taylor, with his square jaw and leading man smile, wasn't exactly immune to rumors either. So what happens when the studio system, terrified of a scandal, decides 2 of its most bankable stars should tie the knot? You get a union that's photogenic, profitable, and, according to many old-school insiders, completely hollow. The press dubbed them the perfect couple, but friends noticed that the spark between them only ever seemed to ignite when the cameras were rolling. They kept up appearances for nearly 12 years, dodging tabloid speculation with the skill of a synchronized dance routine. But eventually, the truth and the boredom caught up with them. The divorce came as no surprise to anyone who paid attention. Looking back, Stanwyck and Taylor's marriage is a prime example of Hollywood's greatest special effect, a love story that only existed in publicity stills. Gainor and Adrien. If you want a marriage built for the studio lot, look no further than Gainor and Adrien. Gainor was the first ever winner of the Best Actress Oscar, Hollywood royalty, from day one. Adrien, on the other hand, was MGM's legendary costume designer, a genius at making others look good while keeping his own truth under wraps. So what happens when you mix an all-American sweetheart with a man whose fabulous wardrobe creations were only matched by his secret private life? You get a lavender marriage so effective, even the tabloids shrugged and moved on. Adrien was openly gay among friends but married Gainor in 1939, likely as a mutual shield against the relentless morality police of the time. Their union was the ultimate PR play, lots of photos, little passion, and plenty of plausible deniability for both. Friends say they were more like siblings than spouses, and rumors swirl that their only child was the product of careful planning, not marital bliss. Yet they kept their arrangement going until Adrien's death in 1959, showing that in Hollywood, sometimes the best costumes aren't worn on the screen, they're stitched into real life. Cole Porter and Linda Lee Thomas. Cole Porter could write love songs that made the world swoon, but his own marriage was a different kind of arrangement, one where affection and artifice went hand in hand. Porter, the razor-sharp composer of Broadway hits, was an open secret in New York and Hollywood circles, gay, brilliant, and utterly unapologetic when out of the public eye. His marriage to socialite Linda Lee Thomas was the definition of sophisticated camouflage. Thomas knew exactly who Porter was, and together they navigated high society as a glamorous duo, each benefiting from the other's style, charm, and most of all, discretion. They traveled the world, hosted dazzling parties, and never let anyone see behind the curtain. Theirs was not a passionate romance, but a partnership based on deep mutual respect, and, if you believe the rumors, the shared relief of not having to pretend too hard. When Thomas died in 1954, Porter was heartbroken, not for the loss of a lover, but for the loss of the one person who truly understood his complicated world. If you ever needed proof that a marriage can be real without being romantic, look no further than Cole and Linda. Montgomery Clift and Libby Holman. Now let's talk about Hollywood's ultimate tortured soul, Montgomery Clift. The brooding heartthrob who defined method acting also defined how to live and love in a minefield of gossip and studio scrutiny. Clift never officially married, but his name is often linked with singer and socialite Libby Holman. Holman herself was no stranger to scandal. Bisexual, magnetic, and haunted by personal tragedies, she became close to Clift in a relationship that looked at times more like a protective shield than a romance. Industry insiders have long whispered that their arrangement was a mutually beneficial cover, Holman helping Clift keep up his public image, and Clift providing Holman with a connection that distracted the press from her own secrets. While there's no marriage certificate to point to, their story is the blueprint for Hollywood's more subtle forms of camouflage, strategic companionship, carefully orchestrated public appearances, and just enough plausible deniability to keep everyone guessing. In a town obsessed with facades, Clift and Holman's almost marriage stands as a testament to the lengths stars would go to in order to protect their private selves. Marlene Dietrich and Rudolph Sber. If Marlene Dietrich taught Hollywood anything, it's that rules were made to be broken and then set on fire for dramatic effect. The German-born superstar was as famous for her androgynous style and magnetic screen presence as she was for her rebellious attitude toward traditional romance. Dietrich married Rudolph Sber in 1923, but don't expect any sappy love stories here. Sber and Dietrich lived apart for most of their marriage, with Sber quietly building a life in Europe while Dietrich blazed a trail through Hollywood and beyond. Off-screen, Dietrich's affairs with both men and women were an open secret. She made little effort to hide her relationships with stars like Mercedes de Acosta and, some say, even Greta Garbo. So what kept Dietrich and Sber's marriage alive, on paper at least, for over 50 years? Simple. It was the ultimate camouflage. Dietrich could appear to be the dutiful wife when it suited her, while both partners enjoyed their freedom away from the prying eyes of the press. In a world obsessed with scandal, Marlene Dietrich proved that sometimes the biggest rebellion is pretending to play by the rules. Greta Garbo and John Gilbert. Greta Garbo was the original Hollywood enigma, the screen siren who made silence her superpower. "I want to be alone," she famously quipped, and for most of her life, she got her wish. But when it came to her romantic entanglements, Garbo was anything but alone, at least in the rumor mill. Her on and off relationship with actor John Gilbert was a tabloid dream, passionate, mysterious, and, in classic Tinseltown tradition, loaded with speculation. The studios, desperate to hush rumors of Garbo's romantic interests in women, pushed her toward Gilbert with all the force of a publicity freight train. There were engagement announcements, accidentally leaked wedding plans, and plenty of photo ops to keep the columnists busy. But every time, Garbo slammed on the brakes, backing out of marriage at the 11th hour. Was it cold feet, a PR ploy, or a brilliant act of self-preservation? Historians suggest all of the above. Garbo's resistance to marital expectations became her calling card, letting her live life on her own terms while still giving the Hollywood machine just enough to work with. Her legacy? Sometimes the best way to keep a secret is to let everyone think they're in on it. Richard Burton and Sybil Williams. Richard Burton, the man whose voice could shake the rafters and whose love life could fill a dozen gossip columns, was never far from a scandal. Before his legendary tabloid-destroying romance with Elizabeth Taylor, Burton was married for over a decade to Sybil Williams, a rising Welsh actress. On the surface, it looked like a classic British fairy tale, the working-class hero, the beautiful ingenue, and the ascent to stardom. But insiders have long speculated there was more going on than just marital bliss. Hollywood's PR machine had a field day, crafting the image of Burton and Sybil as a devoted, picture-perfect couple, just as rumors began swirling about Burton's own orientation and rumored affairs with both men and women. Williams, for her part, reportedly struggled with her own identity and was often cast in the role of dutiful wife, even as her own career ambitions simmered. Their marriage was marked by distance, long stretches apart, and more than a little emotional theater. When Burton finally met Taylor, the entire charade collapsed in a haze of paparazzi flashbulbs and open secrets. Looking back, the Burton-Williams union stands as a classic case of studio-era damage control, a relationship crafted as much for public consumption as for private comfort, a perfectly staged act in the greatest drama Hollywood ever wrote, Raymond Burr and Isabella Ward. For decades, Raymond Burr was the steady hand of justice as TV's Perry Mason, a role that made him America's favorite truth-teller. But in his own life, Burr became an expert at hiding what mattered most. Burr married actress Isabella Ward in 1948, but the marriage fizzled faster than a failed pilot, lasting less than a year. The press chalked it up to irreconcilable differences, but Hollywood insiders suspected there was more to the story. Burr spent the rest of his life fiercely private about his personal affairs, spinning elaborate tales of a tragic wife and lost children, none of which ever existed. What did exist, though, was a decades-long partnership with actor Robert Benavides, with whom Burr shared a home, a vineyard, and a quietly happy life until his death. Burr's brief marriage was the classic Hollywood smokescreen, a quick, photo-friendly union meant to settle the press and get the morality police off his back. In the end, Perry Mason's greatest case was one he solved for himself, finding peace in a world determined to put him on trial. Anthony Perkins and Barry Baronson. Hitchcock may have made Anthony Perkins a horror icon, but it was Hollywood's old-school homophobia that kept Perkins living a double life. Perkins was talented, haunted, and, by all accounts, deeply conflicted about his sexuality. Throughout the 1950s and 1960s, he juggled secret relationships with men, most famously Tab Hunter, while the studios hustled to match him with appropriate female dates. In 1973, Perkins married photographer Barry Baronson, a move that shocked even his close friends. On the surface, it looked like the classic Tinseltown turnaround, the former bachelor, now a settled family man. But many saw it as a last-ditch effort to silence persistent rumors and finally fit the Hollywood mold. Perkins and Baronson had 2 children, and while they maintained a public image of marital bliss, the specter of Perkins's hidden life never quite disappeared. He died of AIDS-related complications in 1992, leaving behind a complicated legacy and a marriage that, while perhaps affectionate, never fully escaped the shadow of Hollywood's closet. Sometimes, the scariest part of a thriller isn't what's in the script, it's what's left unsaid. Loretta Young and Clark Gable. Here's a Hollywood fairy tale with a plot twist the studios hoped you'd never hear. Loretta Young and Clark Gable never officially married, but their relationship was marketed as a model romance, engineered to keep the lid on one of classic Hollywood's biggest scandals. In 1935, during the filming of The Call of the Wild, Young and Gable had an affair that resulted in Young's secret pregnancy, a career-ending prospect in that era. The solution? A PR campaign presenting them as close friends and possible future spouses, keeping the real story buried under mountains of studio-arranged gossip and carefully staged photographs. Young vanished from public view, giving birth in secret and later adopting her own biological daughter, Judy Lewis, to preserve her wholesome image. Gable went on to other high-profile romances, but the myth of his connection with Young lingered for decades, an open secret that only became public long after both stars were gone. In a town obsessed with image, Young and Gable's almost marriage was the ultimate special effect, a trick so convincing, most audiences never realized they'd been fooled. Dorothy Arsner and Marian Morgan. When you talk about trailblazers, Dorothy Arsner belongs at the top of any old Hollywood list. As the first major female film director in the studio era, Arsner smashed more glass ceilings than most people even notice. But her private life was just as groundbreaking. Arsner never bothered with sham marriages to men. Instead, she built a decades-long partnership with choreographer Marian Morgan, a relationship so close they were often mistaken for sisters or roommates. Studios, always desperate to keep up appearances, sometimes tried pairing Arsner with prominent men for public events, but the facade never really stuck. Arsner and Morgan lived openly together in Los Angeles, hosting legendary Hollywood salons where actors, writers, and artists mixed in a rare atmosphere of tolerance and candor. Was it a fake marriage? Not in the traditional sense, but it was certainly a deliberate, strategic act of misdirection. By presenting themselves as a perfectly normal domestic pair of women, Arsner and Morgan managed to fly under the radar of gossip columnists and studio busybodies alike. In a world obsessed with conformity, Arsner wrote her own script, one where she and Morgan were the stars. Salmano and Jill Hawworth engaged. Salmano burst onto the Hollywood scene as the sensitive, troubled Plato in Rebel Without a Cause, and almost immediately became a lightning rod for rumors about his sexuality. As the first major teen idol to be outed posthumously, Minnelli lived much of his adult life under the microscope. Enter Jill Hawworth, a beautiful, rising British actress who became his fiancée during the 1960s. To the tabloids, it looked like a classic Hollywood love match, but those who knew the real story saw things differently. Friends and biographers say their engagement was a strategic shield. Minnelli needed to calm the persistent whispers about his relationships with men, and Hawworth was happy to play the part. They posed for photos, attended premieres, and kept up appearances for as long as the studios demanded, but the act was never truly convincing. The engagement ended quietly, and Minnelli's career slowly faded as Hollywood's tolerance for open secrets failed to keep pace with the times. Still, their partnership stands as one of Hollywood's most famous examples of an almost marriage that was more about PR than passion, a reminder of how far stars had to go just to stay safe. Jan Clayton and Russell Hayden. Jan Clayton, best known as the caring mother on TV's Lassie, found herself in a real-life plot twist that wouldn't have passed the network censors. In 1938, she married Russell Hayden, a rugged cowboy actor who was as all-American as a pair of spurs. On paper, it looked like a match made in Hollywood heaven, two rising stars, smiling for the cameras and attending premieres arm in arm. But behind the scenes, their marriage was anything but a romance for the ages. Industry whispers said Clayton, like many women of her era, was under pressure from her studio to present a conventional image, while Hayden, rumored to be struggling with his own secrets, was happy to oblige. Their marriage was brief, publicity-heavy, and, according to some accounts, emotionally distant. After the inevitable divorce, both stars moved on, but the legacy of their union lived on in the pages of fan magazines and the archives of studio publicists. It's a classic example of Hollywood's favorite trick: make-believe for the cameras, real life for the insiders. Tallulah Bankhead and John Emery. If there was ever a star who could make gossip columnists blush, it was Tallulah Bankhead. The legendary stage and screen actress was notorious for her quick wit, wild parties, and utter disregard for social conventions, including when it came to love. Her brief marriage to actor John Emery in 1937 lasted just 4 years, but even that was considered a shock for those who knew her well. Bankhead was famously open about her bisexuality, and her flings with both men and women were the stuff of Hollywood legend. So why marry Emery at all? Some say it was a play for respectability, a way to appease the studios and keep the more prying tabloids at bay. Others claim it was just another act in Bankhead's lifelong performance, a chance to keep everyone guessing. The truth, as always in Hollywood, is probably a mix of both. What's certain is that Bankhead never let a little thing like a marriage license get in the way of being herself. Her union with Emery is remembered not as a grand romance, but as a footnote in a career defined by defiance. Robert Reed and Marilyn Rosenberger. To generations of TV fans, Robert Reed will always be America's favorite dad, Mike Brady on The Brady Bunch. But behind that wholesome image was a secret Reed guarded fiercely. In the late 1950s, Reed married Marilyn Rosenberger, a union that, from the outside, seemed as wholesome as his later sitcom persona. But Reed's sexuality was an open secret among friends and colleagues, and the marriage was more about image management than true love. The couple separated after just a few years, but Reed kept up appearances for the sake of his career and his public. The reality of his life only became widely known after his death from AIDS-related complications in 1992. In the end, Reed's story is both tragic and deeply emblematic of his era. A man forced to choose between his authentic self and the role that society demanded he play. His fake marriage wasn't just a footnote in his career. It was the price of admission for a seat at Hollywood's table. So, after peeling back the glitter and studio gloss, what do you think? Were these the greatest love stories never told, or Hollywood's most elaborate masquerade ball? From staged romances to secret soulmates, these actors played the ultimate roles just to survive in the spotlight. Which fake marriage shocked you most, or did we miss a hidden legend? Drop your thoughts in the comments, hit subscribe for more untold Hollywood truths, and remember, sometimes the wildest stories are the ones no one was allowed to tell.